Welcome back to Avoidant Decoded. Today, we're going to uncover the deeper consequences of betraying someone who genuinely loved you, and why an avoidant may not understand what they lost until the person they once took for granted is finally gone. There is something I don't usually say this directly, but this subject deserves honesty. Softening the message would only make it less truthful. What I'm about to explain isn't the simple version of karma where someone hurts you and immediately receives the exact punishment they deserve. Real life doesn't usually work that neatly. The consequences are often quieter, slower, and much more complicated. I'm talking about what can happen inside an avoidant after they betray someone whose love, loyalty, patience, and emotional depth became far more important to them than they ever allowed themselves to admit. This can happen even when their behavior made it look as though they didn't care. And betrayal doesn't always mean an obvious act that destroys trust overnight. Sometimes betrayal is much quieter. It's disappearing when someone desperately needed emotional closeness. It's choosing silence when presence was needed. It's giving someone just enough affection to keep their hope alive, then pulling away and leaving them confused. It's accepting someone's unconditional love while refusing to offer the same level of emotional honesty or commitment in return. These patterns can wound someone deeply, even when the person creating them doesn't understand that what they're doing is a form of betrayal. That's part of what makes avoidant behavior so difficult to understand. An avoidant may not consciously think, "I'm betraying this person." Their mind may frame their behavior as protecting themselves, creating space, maintaining independence, or avoiding emotional pressure. But the person on the other side experiences the impact regardless of the intention. Their body remembers the inconsistency. Their nervous system remembers the uncertainty. And while the avoidant may appear unaffected, consequences can begin developing beneath the surface in ways that aren't immediately visible. To understand those consequences, you have to understand something the avoidant often fails to recognize while the relationship is still alive. They may not realize how profoundly your presence has affected their life. This isn't always because they intentionally devalued you. Avoidant attachment can create a distorted perception of emotional closeness. Connection can feel less valuable while it's available, and life without that connection can seem much easier than it actually becomes. That is one of the painful contradictions of avoidant psychology. The very defenses designed to protect someone from emotional pain can also prevent them from fully appreciating the love already in front of them. Emotional walls may reduce fear, but they can also block gratitude, vulnerability, presence, and genuine recognition. Someone can experience an extraordinary connection and still mentally minimize its importance, because fully acknowledging its value would also mean acknowledging how devastating its loss could become. So every withdrawal, broken promise, emotionally unavailable moment, and act of distancing can happen without the avoidant fully understanding what is being placed at risk. Somewhere in the back of their mind, there may be an assumption that the other person will still be there, that they can step away, return later, and find the same relationship waiting for them. What they don't understand is that some forms of love cannot simply be paused and recovered whenever they feel ready. The consequences often don't appear immediately. In fact, the period right after a breakup or major emotional withdrawal can look almost completely opposite. The avoidance defenses may become stronger. Their mind may suppress painful feelings, create explanations that make their choices easier to accept, and push uncomfortable emotions out of awareness. From the outside, this can look like effortless moving on. And for the person who was left behind, that appearance can be devastating. You may watch someone who once told you they cared continue with their life as though nothing significant happened. You may wonder how they can sleep peacefully, laugh, work, socialize, or move forward while you're carrying the weight of everything that happened. Naturally, your mind may conclude that you simply didn't matter enough. But outward calm isn't necessarily proof of emotional peace. Sometimes it's emotional suppression. A person can function perfectly well while avoiding the feelings they aren't prepared to face. Their ability to continue with daily responsibilities doesn't automatically tell you what is happening internally. Their emotional distance may be a defense rather than evidence that nothing mattered. Eventually, however, reality can become harder to avoid. A defense system can delay painful awareness, but it cannot permanently erase reality. One of the strongest turning points can come when the avoidant finally encounters undeniable evidence that what they lost is no longer available to them. Sometimes that evidence is simply your absence. Not the fresh absence immediately after a breakup, but the deeper realization that you've genuinely continued with your life. You're no longer waiting. You're no longer checking for their return. You're no longer organizing your emotional world around whether they might come back. The attention, energy, and affection you once directed toward them have been redirected toward yourself. That can challenge an assumption they may have carried for a long time, that the relationship could always be revisited. Suddenly, the door they believed would remain open isn't open anymore. There is no guaranteed return. There is simply a chapter that ended and a life that is continuing without them. Sometimes the realization happens through something much more personal. They see a photograph of you, hear about you through someone else, come across your social media, or unexpectedly encounter you in person. And what stands out isn't the person they remember, it's the person you've become. You may look calmer, stronger, more grounded, more confident. You may no longer carry the same need for answers or validation. Instead of waiting for someone who couldn't show up consistently, you've created a life that doesn't depend on their presence. You have become more comfortable with yourself. And that growth can reveal something the avoidant couldn't see before. Your value didn't suddenly increase because you became more confident. The value was already there. Your growth simply removed some of the emotional filters that once prevented them from recognizing it. That's when the deeper reckoning can begin. The first change often happens in perception. For the first time, the avoidant may begin seeing the relationship with greater clarity. This isn't simply missing familiar routines or feeling lonely on a particular evening. It's a deeper correction in how they understand what happened. They remember the emotional depth you brought. They remember how honestly you cared. They remember the ways you understood parts of them that they rarely showed other people. They may remember that you saw beyond their defenses and still chose to care. They may finally understand that your patience wasn't desperation and your compassion wasn't weakness. You were offering something rare. The qualities they once overlooked can suddenly become impossible to ignore. And with that realization comes a painful question. Why didn't I recognize this when I had it? Then another realization can follow, and this one may be even harder. They begin connecting their choices with their consequences. Distance no longer looks like an isolated event. It becomes a pattern. They remember the moments when they pulled away instead of communicating, the times they created distance when closeness was needed, the cycle of becoming warm, then retreating, the moments when they offered enough affection to keep the relationship alive, but withheld the vulnerability necessary to make it emotionally secure. Eventually, the pattern becomes clear, and they may also recognize what you endured while that pattern continued. You were patient. You tried to understand. You gave chances. You offered compassion even when their behavior didn't always deserve it. You continued trying to make sense of something that was emotionally confusing because you cared. Confronting that reality can create profound regret and shame, not because someone is being externally punished, but because they can finally see their own behavior without the protective explanations that once made it easier to live with. When I say that betraying someone can ruin an avoidant's life, I don't mean their entire world suddenly collapses. They may continue working, succeeding, socializing, building careers, and appearing completely normal. The damage is often much more personal than visible. What can be lost is access to a version of themselves that existed within that relationship. When they were with you, there may have been a softer side of them, a more open version, a version capable of feeling safe, understood, emotionally alive, and genuinely connected. Your presence may have created an environment where that part of them had room to emerge. They didn't necessarily realize how much the relationship was helping them access that side of themselves. Then they walked away. And after enough distance, they may discover that the independence they once celebrated doesn't always feel like freedom. Sometimes it feels like limitation. The emotional distance that once seemed like maturity can eventually feel like loneliness. The identity built around needing nobody can become difficult to maintain once they know what genuine closeness actually feels like. That's the strange part. Before meeting you, they could tell themselves they didn't need that kind of connection because they had never fully experienced it. After losing it, they know what they're missing. That awareness doesn't necessarily destroy their ability to function. Instead, it can become a quiet background presence in their emotional life. It can appear during lonely evenings, in relationships that never quite reach the same depth, or in unexpected moments when a memory suddenly returns. They may push the thought away, but knowing what existed can make certain forms of emotional distance feel different forever. And there is another consequence that matters just as much. Their choices can reinforce the very patterns that created the loss. The decisions we repeatedly make shape our... While they were creating distance, you were forced to confront what that distance did to you. You had to experience the grief instead of permanently escaping it. You had to sit with unanswered questions. You had to process disappointment, confusion, anger, sadness, and loss. And slowly, you learned how to carry those feelings without allowing them to become your identity. That takes strength. Your ability to love deeply didn't disappear. Your integrity wasn't destroyed. Your capacity for compassion, honesty, loyalty, and vulnerability survived an experience that could have made you bitter. In fact, those qualities may have become more intentional. You learned that loving someone doesn't mean abandoning yourself for them. You learned that patience doesn't require accepting endless inconsistency. You learned that understanding another person's wounds doesn't mean allowing those wounds to repeatedly hurt you. And perhaps most importantly, you discovered that your love was never too much. It was simply being offered to someone who wasn't capable of meeting it in the way you needed. Your kindness wasn't weakness. Your loyalty wasn't foolishness. Your emotional depth wasn't a problem. Your willingness to communicate wasn't neediness. Those qualities are valuable when they are placed in a relationship where they are respected and returned. That's the part of the story worth remembering. Yes, they may eventually understand what they lost. They may recognize your value after the relationship is no longer available to them. They may look back and realize that the person they assumed would always be there eventually chose themselves, but you don't need that realization to prove your worth. Look at what happened to you after they left. You developed self-respect. You built confidence that no longer depends on someone else's attention. You learned to trust your own judgment. You discovered boundaries. You learned what consistency looks like and what emotional unavailability feels like. You became more aware of what you will and will not accept in the future. In the empty space their absence created, you found parts of yourself that may have remained hidden if you had never been forced to rebuild. That's the real transformation. They may have lost someone who loved them deeply, and they may eventually understand the magnitude of that loss. They may also have lost the opportunity to become the version of themselves that the relationship was quietly inviting them to become. But you didn't lose yourself. You survived the silence. You survived the uncertainty. You survived the unanswered messages, the confusing behavior, the heartbreak, and the long process of putting your emotional world back together. And somewhere along that journey, you became more whole. That growth belongs to you. No betrayal can take it back. No person's inability to love you properly can reduce your worth. No avoidance, regret, realization, or lack of realization has the authority to decide what your future becomes. That is the greatest difference between your story and theirs. They may eventually look back and wonder what they failed to protect. You can look forward and know exactly who you are. And once you truly understand your own value, another person's inability to recognize it no longer has the power to determine where your life goes next. So before we close this conversation, I want you to understand one thing clearly. The deepest consequence of betraying someone who genuinely loved you is not always something the outside world can see. There may be no dramatic collapse, no obvious punishment, and no moment where everything suddenly falls apart. Sometimes the consequence is much quieter. It is the realization that comes later, when the distractions disappear and the person finally has to sit alone with the choices they made. It is the moment when they understand that the person they pushed away was not simply another relationship, another chapter, or another source of attention. That person brought something into their life that cannot easily be recreated. An avoidant may spend a long time convincing themselves that distance was necessary, that leaving was easier, or that they simply needed freedom. In the beginning, those explanations may provide relief. They may even feel certain that they made the right decision. But time has a way of removing the emotional noise around a decision. Once the relationship is no longer immediately available, the mind can begin seeing details that were previously hidden behind defense mechanisms. They may remember the conversations they dismissed, the affection they took for granted, the patience they received, and the moments when someone was asking for nothing more than honesty and emotional presence. Eventually, they may recognize that the person wasn't asking for perfection. They were asking to feel chosen. They were asking for consistency. They wanted to know that the love they were giving wasn't being received while their own emotional needs were being ignored. And that realization can be painful because it forces the avoidant to understand that many of the things they once interpreted as pressure were actually opportunities for connection. The hardest part may be realizing that the relationship didn't fail simply because love wasn't there. In some cases, love was there, but the ability to handle that love wasn't. Fear became stronger than vulnerability. Avoidance became easier than communication. Temporary emotional comfort became more important than protecting something meaningful. And by repeatedly choosing distance, they may have eventually created the exact loss they were trying to protect themselves from. But I don't want your attention to remain focused on whether they regret it. I don't want your healing to depend on whether they eventually come back, apologize, recognize your value, or privately miss you. Those things may happen or they may not. You cannot build your peace around possibilities you don't control. Your freedom begins when you stop needing their realization to validate your experience, because you already know what happened. You know how deeply you cared. You know how many times you tried to understand. You know how often you gave someone another opportunity because you believed there was something beneath their distance worth reaching. You know the patience you offered, the conversations you initiated, the confusion you endured, and the emotional energy you invested. You don't need someone else to confirm that your love was real. And perhaps this experience taught you something that no relationship could have taught you otherwise. Loving another person and losing yourself are not the same thing. You can care deeply about someone and still walk away when their behavior repeatedly damages your peace. You can understand someone's emotional wounds without volunteering to be wounded by them. You can have compassion for their fears while still having boundaries around what you will accept. That is growth. There may have been a time when you believed that if you were patient enough, understanding enough, loving enough, or consistent enough, eventually they would feel safe enough to give you what you needed. But sometimes the most important lesson is realizing that you cannot love someone into emotional readiness. You cannot communicate someone out of a pattern they are unwilling to confront. You cannot carry another person's healing for them. Your responsibility was never to rescue them from themselves. Your responsibility is to protect the person you are becoming. And look at who you became because of everything you survived. Maybe you are more cautious now, but you are also more aware. Maybe you don't trust as quickly as you once did, but you understand your boundaries better. Maybe you still remember what happened, but the memory no longer controls every decision you make. You learned how to recognize inconsistency. You learned how emotional distance affects you. You learned that chemistry isn't enough without consistency, and that words mean very little when behavior continually contradicts them. You also learned something beautiful about yourself. Your capacity to love deeply survived. That matters. Someone else's inability to receive your love doesn't make your love worthless. Their inability to communicate doesn't make your emotional needs unreasonable. Their fear of intimacy doesn't mean you were asking for too much. And their decision to walk away doesn't mean you were somehow not enough. Sometimes two people can have a meaningful connection and still be unable to create a healthy relationship because one person isn't emotionally prepared to participate in the way the relationship requires. That doesn't erase what you shared, but it does change what you should expect from the future. You deserve a relationship where love doesn't have to be decoded every day. You deserve consistency without begging for it, communication without chasing it, affection without wondering when it will disappear. You deserve someone who doesn't make you question whether having emotional needs makes you difficult. You deserve someone who can remain present when the relationship becomes vulnerable instead of disappearing the moment things become real. And if the avoidant eventually realizes what they lost, let that realization belong to them. If they look back and regret their choices, that is their lesson. If they realize that your absence feels different from every other absence, that is their realization. If they finally understand that the love they dismissed was rare, that is their truth to carry. You don't have to carry it for them. Your chapter is different. Your chapter is about becoming someone who no longer measures their worth through another person's ability to recognize it. It's about understanding that rejection doesn't automatically mean you're unworthy. Sometimes it simply means the other person was unable, unwilling, or unprepared to meet you where you stood. And there is a powerful freedom in accepting that. You don't have to make them regret losing you. You don't have to prove that you are doing better. You don't have to post your happiness, hoping they will see it. You don't have to disappear strategically so they will chase you. You don't have to manipulate silence into a message. Just live, heal, grow, become so grounded in yourself that whether they return or never return, your emotional foundation remains intact. Because the greatest victory isn't watching someone who hurt you finally experience regret. The greatest victory is reaching the point where their regret is no longer necessary for you to feel complete. One day, you may look back at this entire experience and realize that the person you were trying so desperately to be chosen by was never supposed to determine your value. You were already worthy before they arrived. You were worthy while they were loving you imperfectly. You were worthy when they withdrew. You were worthy when they left, and you are just as worthy now. They may remember the person they lost, but you get to remember the person you found. You found your boundaries. You found your voice. You found your self-respect. You found the courage to stop accepting emotional uncertainty as love. You found the strength to choose peace over chasing answers. And perhaps that's the final truth. They may spend time understanding what they failed to protect, but you can spend your time protecting what you finally discovered within yourself. Your heart, your peace, your dignity, your future. So don't wait for karma. Don't wait for an apology. Don't wait for the day they finally understand everything. Let their consequences belong to them. Let your healing belong to you. Because the moment you stop measuring your recovery by what happens inside their mind, you become free from the last emotional connection keeping you tied to the past. You no longer need them to suffer for you to heal. You no longer need them to regret you to know that you mattered. And you no longer need them to choose you because you have finally learned to choose yourself. That is not losing. That is becoming whole. And when you reach that place, something changes forever. The person who once made you question your worth becomes part of your history rather than the author of your future. Their inability to love you properly becomes a lesson, not a life sentence. Their distance becomes a reminder of what you will never again settle for. Their betrayal becomes a chapter you survived rather than an identity you carry. Maybe they eventually understand your value. Maybe they don't. But either way, your life continues, and this time, it continues with you fully present in it.